What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another Top 10 Commander video. This time I would like to talk about my picks for the 10 best removal cards in the Commander format. Now, before I move on to the video, first I would like to remind you that most of you who are watching right now are not actually subscribed to the channel. So I would really appreciate it if you took a second to hit that subscribe button, because it really does help me out. I love making these videos for you. So number 10 here, we have a bit of a tie, but it's understandable. They're pretty much exactly the same card, but in different colors. Wrath of God and Damnation. One is white and the other is black. That's pretty much it. Wrath of God is where your standard board wipe comes from. If it's around 4 mana and it destroys creatures, a lot of that is because Wrath of God set that mold. However, Wrath of God does have something a little bit more unique that newer board wipes don't share. If we're talking about creatures, you don't want to give them the chance of regenerating, so it prevents regeneration. It's a very uncommon ability, especially with newer cards, but it still prevents that. There are some cards that are quite annoying that do have regeneration, like that Thrune troll guy from Mirrodin Besieged. That's just an example. But, this is where the standard comes from. I think Damnation might have a slight edge, just considering that there are a ton of board wipes in white, and board wipes that can deal with more than just creatures. Damnation in mono black does stand apart from just about every other creature board wipe. And then number 9, we have Austere Command. Probably one of the best board wipes ever made. Used to be a lot more expensive. It's been reprinted quite a few times now. But it's great. It can deal with artifacts, enchantments, and it can deal with certain creatures of a CMC that you really need to get rid of. I think the flexibility in what modes you can choose allow yourself the ability to play around whatever you have currently on the field. If you have a lot more artifacts and enchantments compared to your opponents, you're going to want to have those stick around. So you can just go for a straight up creature board wipe. If you have mostly creatures, you could go the other route and destroy all artifacts, enchantments. Just a great, versatile board wipe. This is really what you want to go for, compared to something like just a generic creature board wipe, because this affords you the ability of dealing with different permanent types. Number 8 is another tie, but again, it's understandable. They do almost exactly the same thing. Beast Within and Generous Gift. You destroy a target permanent, and in return, you give that opponent a 3/3 token. It could be a beast, it could be an elephant. That's really it. You destroy a permanent, which is the best part of the card. Yeah, you give them a creature, but you have the ability, if you absolutely need to destroy something like a land. This isn't really common when it comes to targeting removal, because usually if it's that good, it's only non-land permanent. Like, you're only really able to deal with something that doesn't hurt their mana base, but these cards are so good because if there's a Guy's Cradle on the field, if there's a Cabal Coffers on the field, you can destroy it, and they get a 3/3 token. Which in Commander, giving them a 3/3 token doesn't quite have that same impact as with limited 1v1, so it's definitely a positive trade. Number 7, we have Chaos Warp. I think this is better, believe it or not, because you are able to get around Indestructibles. Chaos Warp just shuffles it back into its owner's library. They do have the chance of getting something better off the top of their deck, but my argument for Chaos Warp has always been, you're using it on the best permanent on the field, which means whatever they get off the top of their deck, 99.999% of the time is not going to be worse than what was already the worst thing on the field. So I would put it in the same neighborhood as Beast Within and Generous Gift as far as targeting removal goes, but it's just a tad bit better because, first of all, Red doesn't really have a lot of good cards like this, and second, it does deal with something like Avacyn Angel of Hope. You can't deal with Avacyn Angel of Hope with those other two cards. Number 6, we have Toxic Deluge. Another great card, another great use of 3 mana. You do have to pay some life in order to get the most out of it, which is the only downside. Late game it could be dead, but you shouldn't really have to pay any more than 6 or 7 life to get rid of most problems. But again, we're talking about a good use of 3 mana. This will also get rid of Indestructibles. It'll get around a lot of those annoying creatures. And this, making it essentially a 3 mana board wipe for creatures, puts it a little bit ahead something like Damnation, in my opinion. It is objectively better than just about any other board wipe in black, at least for the few mana that you have to cast it. And then number 5, since we're talking about a good use of mana, how about 1 red mana most of the time to play something like Blasphemous Act? Yeah, if there's enough creatures on the field, this doesn't cost you 9 mana. That's ridiculous. In a 4-player multiplayer game, you will most often only have to pay 1 red mana to deal 13 damage to each creature. 13 damage means you're probably getting rid of each creature. doesn't deal with indestructibles, but again, red doesn't really have a lot of good cards like this. It's super efficient because of that cost reduction and just taking advantage of the multiplayer format that is Commander. Like, this card wasn't intentionally designed for the format. It is just ridiculous that it's so easy to get rid of problems in a color that usually forces you to spend a lot of mana into an X-costed spell in order to burn off creatures. Very rare, definitely one of the above average cards that red has to offer. And then number 4, we have Anguish On Making. Now, each one of these targeting removal spells, they have their own advantages. Anguish On Making's advantage is that you don't give your opponent anything, and you exile a non-land permanent. The 3 life doesn't matter, so it's not that big of a deal. You are going to exile the best non-land permanent on the field for only 3 mana at instant speed. You don't get the flexibility in being able to hit a land with this, but again, that's only really useful if you are going up against something like a Gaia's Cradle, which is really the only knock against the card. But other than that, exiling removal is proven to be the most effective removal, especially if you need to get rid of any kind of good graveyard synergy. If you need to eliminate a very powerful card that your opponent can easily get back from the graveyard, exiling is usually the best way to do that. And in black and white, you do have a lot of exiling removal to choose from. Anguish On Making, I just believe, is the best that you can choose from because it gives you the flexibility in what you can target, which is really any non-land permanent. If you look at something like Despark, it has to be 4 or greater. That's kind of a downside. This is really just a standard removal spell that you're going to see in almost every single black and white deck out there. And then number 3, we have Swords to Plowshares with a slight nod to Path to Exile. I don't think it's better than Swords. This is really Swords to Plowshares' spot here at number 3. The downside is that you're only able to deal with creatures, but for 1 white mana, that's understandable. You exile a target creature, you give them some life equal to that creature's power, call that a done deal. They're never going to see that creature again, save for maybe some cards that interact with exile. But this is the standard of creature removal, especially targeting creature removal. Doesn't really get much better than only having to pay 1 mana with no other costs. No additional costs, nothing. When it comes to creature removal, this isn't just a mono-white thing either. If your deck's playing white at all, it's 3, 4, 5 colors. Swords to Plowshares is still worth playing. And then number 2, we have Assassin's Trophy. We got back in Guilds of Ravnica, one of the most competitive removal spells ever made. For only 2 mana, you get to destroy any target permanent an opponent controls, and in return, they get a basic land. But you get the upside of something like a Beast Within, but with a lower mana cost that fits in with a lot of these newer competitive decks that when they're looking for removal, they can't really afford to play anything above 2 mana. Assassin's Trophy is the new standard now. I'll give an honorable mention here to Abrupt Decay because it's very much in that same category. Only 2 mana instant speed, you are limited on what you're able to deal with, I think, but if we're just talking about competitive play, that's worth mentioning. Assassin's Trophy just excels no matter where you put it. For a lot of the same reasons that I think Swords to Plowshares and Anguish On Making are ubiquitous, I think Assassin's Trophy is ubiquitous, but at the same time it is a slightly more competitive removal spell. So number 1 here shouldn't be too much of a surprise. This card's quite ridiculous, and I think we all know it, Cyclonic Rift. If there's a downside, it's that, yeah, you do have to pay 7 mana to overload it, but that's 7 mana that you can overload at any time. The fact that you can do this at your opponent's end step means that you can just bounce back all of their non-land permanents before your turn even begins, leaving all of them wide open for you to pretty much win, do whatever you want to do. It's super versatile, and a lot of bounce removal tends to be versatile, so if you want to follow this up with something like a Windfall, that can be really nasty. It's interesting because blue doesn't really do removal that well. So if it has like the one best card, which everyone complains about here in Cyclonic Rift, that's kind of justified. It's really the only thing that they have in blue. As far as removal goes, that is this effective. Everything else is just, oh, you might be able to bounce back a creature, you might be able to exile 1 creature. Usually not going to deal with non-land permanents that often, but Cyclonic Rift being the one card that does that this well, it's excusable. We haven't really seen anything like it since. It's really that one card you have to look out for. But casually, and even some competitive decks, really take advantage of Cyclonic Rift. Even if it's not played at the best possible time, the most advantageous time, it's still a headache to have to deal with. And to me, that makes it the best removal card in the Commander format. So anyway, let me know what you think about these 10 removal cards, my picks for the 10 best removal cards in the Commander format. Feel free to leave your own favorite removal cards in the comment section below. As always, subscribe, like, comment, share, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Void here signing off. I will see you next time.